This is our first video in a series on atoms. Within these topics, we will also cover discussions of the scientific method as well as different states of matter. This video is meant to provide an overview of what we will be covering in future videos. By the end of this series of videos, you should be able to describe the scientific approach to knowledge, also known as the scientific method, describe Dalton's atomic theory, given a molecular formula and mass of one element, determine the mass of other elements, describe the experimental evidence for the presence of electrons, protons, neutrons, as well as the nucleus of an atom. Given two values in the following isotopic representation, determine the third. So you might be given X and Z, X and A and asked to determine Z. You might be given A and Z and asked to determine X. Use an isotopic representation to determine the number of protons, neutrons, and electrons for a given isotope. Given the percent composition of a series of isotopes and their masses, determine the average molecular weight for an element, or vice versa. So that means you'd be given some of this information and asked for the missing values. In addition to being able to do those tasks, you'll need to be able to define and explain the difference between the following terms. In terms of states of matter, solids, liquids, and gases, what do we mean by those, both on a macroscopic and a microscopic level? Atoms, molecules, elements, compounds, mixtures, both homogeneous and heterogeneous mixtures. And in terms of the scientific method, what is meant by a hypothesis, a scientific law, and we will be using the examples of the law of conservation of mass, law of definite proportions, law of multiple proportions. Then what do we mean by a scientific theory, using as our example the atomic theory? What do we mean by cathode rays, electrons, protons, neutrons, the nucleus? What is the mass number, atomic number, anions, cations, atomic mass, sometimes called atomic weight, the mass of an isotope, and what do we mean by a mole? So what you'll be expected to be able to do is define each one of those terms and explain the differences between two or more related terms. The game plan for this series of lectures is we will be discussing and defining some of the key terms. Sometimes those terms that we use in science are slightly different and often more precise than is used in common usage. A key example of this is theory. A scientific theory is very different from the everyday usage of the word theory. We will get into that when we get into that series of subjects. We will use the states of matter and composition to look at microscopic versus macroscopic conceptual models. One of the key things that you'll need to be able to do in chemistry is switch between everyday stuff, which is macroscopic ideas, and what's happening on the atomic level, which would be our microscopic view. We will talk about the scientific method and then use the development of the modern atomic theory to illustrate how the scientific method works. We will be highlighting the experimental setups and results that led to our current understanding of matter. We will discuss the current theory of matter and related topics, including isotopes, molecular masses, subatomic particles, and the concept of the mole.